The champagne flutes shattered against Italian marble like 1,000 broken promises. Isabella Romano Hartwell stood frozen in her 47, Vera Wang gown, mascara carving black rivers down her cheeks as 300 of Manhattan's elite watched her world implode. "I can't marry someone who needs me to be his mother," she whispered into the microphone, her voice echoing through the cathedral-sized ballroom. Her billionaire fiancé to a tech empire crumpled like expensive tissue paper. But in the back row, a man in a borrowed suit holding his 7-year-old daughter's hand stood up. He'd been serving champagne to these people for months, invisible until this moment. What happened next would change everything about what it means to be rich, poor, and real. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The sound came first. Crystal meeting marble in a symphony of destruction that would replay in Isabella Romano Hartwell's nightmares for months. 300 guests in the Mandarin Oriental's grand ballroom turned as one organism, their collective intake of breath creating a vacuum of anticipation. Isabella stood at the altar, her grandmother's pearl necklace suddenly feeling like a noose. The champagne flute had slipped from her trembling fingers during what should have been the toast to end all toasts, the moment when Manhattan's golden boy, tech heir Harrison Blackwood III, officially claimed his prize. "Isabella?" Harrison's voice carried the entitled confusion of someone who had never been denied anything. His Armani tuxedo was perfect. His Harvard MBA smile was perfect. Even his trust fund was perfect. Everything about him was perfect. And that was the problem. She looked out at the sea of faces she'd known since childhood, faces that belonged to people who measured worth in stock portfolios and summer homes in the Hamptons, her father's business associates, her mother's charity circle, Harrison's tech industry royalty, all of them waiting. The microphone was still in her hand from the toast. She hadn't planned what came next. Sometimes the truth just demands to be heard. "I can't do this." Her voice, amplified by the sound system, cut through the silence like a blade through silk. 3 words that would cost her everything. Harrison stepped closer, his cologne Tom Ford Oud Wood, 400 ounces suddenly suffocating. "Bella, you're just nervous. Wedding nerves. Everyone gets them." The pet name made her stomach turn. Bella. Like she was some Disney princess waiting to be saved. "I'm not nervous, Harrison." She turned to face the crowd, the microphone trembling in her grip. "I'm awake." Her mother, Dr. Patricia Romano Hartwell, cardiac surgeon and master of controlling every variable, half rose from her front row seat. The warning in her eyes was nuclear. "Don't you dare embarrass this family." But Isabella was past caring about embarrassment. She was drowning in a life that looked perfect from the outside: the penthouse apartment, the art collection, the charity galas, the man who treated her like a beautiful investment that required careful management. "For the past year," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "I've been planning a wedding for a marriage that feels like a business merger. I've been choosing flowers while ignoring the fact that my fiancé asks me to reschedule dinner dates so he can optimize his daily meditation app usage." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd. Harrison's face was cycling through shades of red. "I've been pretending not to notice that he has his assistant text me good morning messages because he's too busy disrupting the wellness space to remember I exist before noon." The ripple became a wave. Phones appeared, recording everything. This would be on page 6, by evening, on TikTok in an hour. Harrison grabbed her arm, not hard, but firm enough to convey ownership. "Isabella, let's discuss this privately." She looked down at his manicured hand on her arm, then back at his face. Even now, even as his world collapsed, he was trying to manage the situation, control the narrative, minimize damage to his personal brand. "There's nothing to discuss." She pulled free, the beading on her dress catching the light like armor. "I don't want to be married to someone who treats our relationship like a project that needs optimizing. I gave you everything. You gave me your version of everything." Her voice carried across the ballroom, reaching every corner, every uncomfortable guest. "You gave me a life where I feel like I'm suffocating in bubble wrap." She turned to scan the crowd, looking for something real in a sea of Botox and borrowed authenticity. Her gaze swept past the front rows of family friends, past her father's poker buddies, past Harrison's startup friends with their casual wear rebellion uniforms, and stopped. In the back row, barely visible behind a pillar, stood a man who didn't belong, mid-30s maybe, with calloused hands and a suit that had clearly been rented. Next to him, a little girl in a yellow dress that had been carefully ironed but couldn't hide the fact that it came from Target, not Bergdorf's. The man wasn't looking at Isabella. He was looking at his daughter, smoothing her hair with the kind of gentle attention that Harrison had never shown anyone in the year she'd known him. The little girl was maybe 7, with wide eyes and the kind of serious expression children wear when they're trying to be on their best behavior in a grown-up world. For a moment, Isabella forgot about the microphone, the crowd, the disaster she was creating. She watched this stranger crouch down to his daughter's level, whisper something that made the girl giggle, then stand back up and straighten his tie with the unself-conscious confidence of someone who knew exactly who he was. Someone real. The microphone feedback screeched, bringing her back to the moment. Harrison was saying something about counseling, about working through this, about how much he'd invested in their future together. Always the bottom line with him. Harrison. She cut him off, her voice gentle now, almost kind. You're a good man. You're going to make someone very happy someday. But that someone isn't me. She started to pull off her engagement ring, 5 carats, ethically sourced, of course, but her hands were shaking too badly. I need someone who doesn't need me to schedule spontaneity into our calendar. I need someone who doesn't optimize our conversations for efficiency. She paused, her eyes finding the man in the back row again. He was watching her now, his expression unreadable but somehow warm. I need a real man. The words hung in the air like incense. Harrison's face went white, then red, then white again. A real man? What the hell does that even mean, Isabella? I built a company from nothing. I'm worth $200 million. I give to charity. I do yoga. I recycle. What exactly do you want from me? And there it was. The question that revealed everything. What did she want from him? She wanted him to stop asking what she wanted and start paying attention to who she was. She wanted him to notice that she hated the orchids he sent every Tuesday because they reminded her of funeral arrangements. She wanted him to remember that she was afraid of elevators without her having to put it in his calendar app. She wanted him to love her messiness instead of trying to solve it. She wanted to feel like a woman, not a problem to be debugged. I want you to want me enough to fight for me instead of trying to optimize me, she said finally. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison stared at her for a long moment, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, he shook his head. You're being irrational. This is just pre-wedding anxiety taken to an extreme. We can work through this with the right therapeutic intervention. Stop. The word came out harder than she intended. Just stop. She turned back to the crowd, 300 faces staring at her like she was a fascinating car accident. Her mother looked like she was planning Isabella's funeral. Her father was already on his phone, probably doing damage control with his business partners. But the man in the back row was still watching her. And when their eyes met across the room, he did something unexpected. He nodded. Not approval exactly. More like recognition. Like he understood what it cost to tell the truth in a room full of people who lived on beautiful lies. Isabella felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking opening. Like she could breathe for the first time in months. She pulled the microphone closer to her lips. I'm sorry, she said to the room. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, for the embarrassment, for the wasted champagne, but I'm not sorry for refusing to spend my life pretending to be someone I'm not. She set the microphone down on the altar, gathered the train of her dress, and walked. Not down the aisle, she couldn't face that march of judgment. Instead, she headed for the service door near the Kit Hartwell, the one the catering staff had been using all evening. As she passed the back row, the man with the little girl stepped slightly into the aisle. Miss? His voice was quiet, meant only for her. You okay? She stopped, surprised by the question. Not, "Are you insane?" or, "Do you need help with damage control?" Just genuine concern from a complete stranger. "I will be," she said. The little girl tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why is the pretty lady crying?" "Sometimes grown-ups cry when they do something really brave, sweetheart." Isabella looked down at the child, then back at the man. His eyes were brown with gold flecks, and when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with her dress, or her family name, or her trust fund. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she pushed through the service door and disappeared into the Kit Hartwell, leaving behind the wreckage of her perfect life and the first glimpse of something that might actually be real. Behind her, the ballroom erupted into chaos, but for the first time in longer than she could remember, Isabella Romano Hartwell was exactly where she belonged. Even if she had no idea where that was, the Mandarin Oriental's service elevator was not built for ball gowns. Isabella stood pressed against the brushed steel wall, her dress cascading around her like expensive seafoam, while a busboy with kind eyes pretended not to notice she was crying. The elevator descended in mechanical silence, carrying her away from the wreckage of her life one floor at a time. When the doors opened on the loading dock level, she stepped out into a different world. Concrete floors, fluorescent lighting, the smell of industrial dishwasher soap and cigarette smoke from the staff break area. Real smells, working smells. She had no plan. No phone was in her clutch, which was still upstairs with her mother, who was probably sedating herself with champagne while fielding calls from society reporters. No money, no identification. Just 30 pounds of Italian silk and a growing sense that she'd just jumped off a cliff without checking if there was water below. "Hey!" She turned. The man from the back row was standing in the doorway, his daughter's hand in his. The little girl was clutching a small bouquet of flowers, the cheap kind from the hotel gift shop, not the $1,000 arrangements her mother had insisted on for the wedding. "I thought you might need these more than the centerpieces needed them," he said, nodding toward his daughter. The girl stepped forward shyly. "My daddy said you looked sad." "Flowers help when you're sad." Isabella knelt down, not caring about her dress, and accepted the bouquet. Baby's breath and carnations. The kind of flowers normal people bought for normal occasions. They were perfect. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie. Sophie Martinez." The girl looked up at her father with obvious adoration. "That's my daddy, Miguel. He makes the best pancakes in the whole world. Miguel Martinez." She filed the name away like a secret. "Thank you, Sophie. These are beautiful." Isabella stood, still holding the flowers. "I'm Isabella." "Like the princess." Sophie clapped her hands. "I used to think so," Isabella said quietly. "But I think I was wrong about what kind of princess I wanted to be." Miguel was studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read, not pity exactly, more like recognition. Like he'd been where she was, maybe not in a ball gown on a loading dock, but in that place where you realize everything you thought you wanted was slowly killing you. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. The question hung in the air. Did she? Her penthouse apartment was Harrison's. Her trust fund came with strings attached to her parents' approval. Her friends were all Harrison's friends, or people who would side with her family out of social obligation. "I'll figure something out," she said. Because admitting she had nowhere to go felt like admitting defeat. That's not an answer. His directness caught her off guard. Harrison would have accepted her deflection, maybe offered to hire someone to solve the problem for her. Miguel just waited, like he had all the time in the world for the truth. "No," she said finally, "I don't have anywhere to go." Sophie tugged on her father's jacket. "Daddy, can Isabella come have pancakes with us? She looks hungry." Sophie Miguel started. "It's okay," Isabella said quickly. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing if we're inviting," Miguel said. Then to his daughter, "But we need to ask Isabella if she wants to come, not tell her she has to." "Do you want to come have pancakes with us?" Sophie asked seriously. "We live in Queens. It's really far from here, But the subway is fun, and Daddy lets me pick the music. Isabella looked down at the little girl, then at Miguel. There was something in his expression, not charity, but genuine offer. The kind of invitation extended between equals, not a rescue mission. "I'd like that," she said. "But I should probably change first. This dress isn't exactly subway appropriate." Miguel glanced around the loading dock, then at a maintenance closet nearby. "Give me a minute." He disappeared into the closet and emerged with a hotel staff uniform, black pants, and a white button-down shirt, still in plastic dry cleaning bags. One of the servers called in sick. They had to bring in extras. He handed her the uniform. "It's not glamorous, but it's practical." "Daddy always says practical is better than pretty," Sophie added sagely. "Sophie, that's not." Miguel looked embarrassed. "I didn't mean you look beautiful. The dress is beautiful. I just meant—" "You meant practical is better than pretty," Isabella said, surprising herself by laughing. "And you're absolutely right." She looked around for a place to change, and Miguel pointed toward a single-occupancy restroom near the loading dock. "It's clean. The night manager's a stickler about that." 20 minutes later, Isabella emerged transformed. The hotel uniform fit reasonably well, though she'd had to roll up the pants and tie the shirt at her waist. Her hair was in a simple ponytail, her makeup washed off. The wedding dress hung carefully in the bathroom, a $30,000 ghost of her former life. "Better?" she asked. Sophie looked her up and down seriously, then nodded. "Much better. Now you look like a real person." Miguel shot his daughter a look, but Isabella laughed again. "She's right. I feel like a real person." "The subway's this way," Miguel said, gesturing toward the exit. As they walked through the loading dock toward the street, Isabella realized she hadn't thought about Harrison, or her parents, or the social media disaster unfolding upstairs in over an hour. For the first time in months, maybe years, she was living in the present moment instead of managing the next one. The subway station was a per census, the screech of brakes, the press of bodies, the smell of hot metal and humanity. She'd taken cars and private drivers for so long she'd forgotten what the city actually felt like at street level. Sophie was a veteran subway rider, 7 years old and completely at home in the chaos. She held both their hands as they waited for the 7 train, chattering about school and her best friend Maria and how her teacher said she was getting really good at reading chapter books. "What grade are you in?" Isabella asked. "2nd grade. But I read at a 4th grade level," Sophie said proudly. "Daddy reads with me every night before bed. We're reading Charlotte's Web right now." Isabella glanced at Miguel. "That's a wonderful book." "It's sad, though," Sophie continued. "Charlotte dies at the end. But Daddy says sometimes sad stories are important because they teach us about love." The train arrived with a thunderous clatter, and they squeezed into a car packed with late-night commuter shift workers heading home, young people dressed for Saturday night adventures, families with tired children. Real people living real lives. Isabella found herself studying Miguel as the train rocked toward Queens. He was different from the men in her usual circles. His hands told small scars, calluses, the evidence of actual work. His suit was off the rack but well maintained, and he wore it with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his own worth had nothing to do with designer labels. "What do you do?" she asked, raising her voice slightly over the train noise. "Construction. Mostly commercial buildings. Some residential renovation." He smiled. "Nothing glamorous, but it pays the bills, and I get to work with my hands." "Daddy builds things," Sophie added. "He built my bookshelf and my desk, and he's teaching me how to use tools. Real ones, not toy ones." "That's amazing," Isabella said, and meant it. When was the last time someone had made something for her with their own hands? Harrison bought her gifts, expensive ones, but they were always purchased, never created. "What about you?" Miguel asked. "When you're not running away from weddings, I mean." Isabella laughed, but the question made her pause. What did she do? She had a master's degree in art history from Columbia. She sat on 3 charity boards. She attended galas and gallery openings and dinner parties where people discussed the economy and the latest Broadway shows. But what did she actually do? I'm still figuring that out, she said finally. Miguel nodded, like that was a perfectly reasonable answer. Figuring it out is underrated. Most people think they have to know everything right away. The train pulled into their station Roosevelt Avenue in Queensland. They emerged into a completely different New York. Smaller buildings, diverse faces, the smell of food trucks and authentic life. Isabella had lived in Manhattan her entire life, but this might as well have been a foreign country. Miguel's apartment building was a 3-story brick structure with a small front garden where someone had planted tomatoes and marigolds. It was clean, well-maintained, and thoroughly normal. "Home sweet home," he said, unlocking the front door. Their apartment was on the second floor, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room that doubled as Sophie's homework space, and a Kit Hartwell just big enough for a small table and chairs. Everything was clean and organized, but there was something else too: love. It was in the way Sophie's drawings were carefully displayed on the refrigerator, in the bookshelf Miguel had built filled with library books and board games, in the small framed photos of the two of them at various ages. This was what a home looked like when it was built by hands instead of purchased by credit cards. "Pancakes!" Sophie announced, racing toward the Kit Hartwell. Miguel laughed. "It's 10 o'clock at night, Mija. Maybe we should start with something smaller." "But you promised Isabella pancakes." "I'll make pancakes," Isabella heard herself say. "If that's okay. If you have the ingredients." Miguel looked surprised. "You cook?" "I used to. Before." She gestured vaguely, encompassing everything: the trust fund, the society life, the world where personal chefs and catered events had replaced the simple pleasure of making something with your own hands. "I'd like to try again." 20 minutes later, Isabella was standing at Miguel's small stove, flipping pancakes, while Sophie provided detailed commentary on proper pancake technique. Miguel sat at the Kit Hartwell table, watching them both with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "They smell perfect," Sophie declared. "Daddy, they smell like the ones you make." "Better," Miguel said quietly. Isabella felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the stove. When was the last time someone had said she was good at something practical? When was the last time she'd felt useful instead of ornamental? They ate their midnight pancakes at the small Kit Hartwell table, Sophie chattering about school, while Miguel asked Isabella gentle questions about her life, not the dramatic stuff, not the scandal she'd just created, but real things. What books she liked to read, whether she'd ever been to the Museum of Natural History, if she knew how to ride a bike. Normal things, human things. It was nearly midnight when Sophie finally fell asleep on the couch, curled up against Isabella's side while they watched an old movie. Miguel covered his daughter with a blanket, then gestured toward the small balcony off the living room. "Want some air?" They stepped outside into the cool night. The view wasn't much: other apartment buildings, a slice of street, the distant glow of the city, but Isabella found it more beautiful than the Manhattan skyline from her penthouse. "She likes you," Miguel said, leaning against the railing. "She's incredible. You've done an amazing job with her. It's just been the two of us for 4 years now, since her mom died." The words hung in the night air. Isabella felt something shift inside her, a recognition of real loss, real struggle, real love. This man had built a life from nothing but determination and devotion. He'd raised a daughter who was confident and kind and secure in her father's love. He was everything Harrison wasn't. Everything Isabella hadn't even known she was looking for. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Thanks, it was cancer, ovarian." She fought hard, but... He shrugged, but she could see the old pain in the gesture. Sophie was 3, old enough to remember her, but young enough to adapt. Kids are resilient, and fathers can be pretty resilient too. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Isabella felt something pass between them. Recognition, maybe, or possibility. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "Tomorrow, I mean. After tonight." She'd been avoiding thinking about tomorrow. Tomorrow meant dealing with her parents, with Harrison, with the media circus she'd created. Tomorrow meant figuring out how to build a life from scratch when you'd never actually learned how to live. I have no idea, she said honestly. Want some advice? She nodded. Don't go back to what doesn't fit. Not because it's easier, not because people expect you to. Life's too short to spend it pretending to be someone you're not. They stood in comfortable silence, looking out at the sleeping city. Somewhere out there, Isabella's old life was waiting for her to come back and apologize, to fix what she'd broken, to return to being the woman everyone expected her to be. But for the first time in her adult life, she knew exactly who she wanted to become, and it had nothing to do with who she used to be. Isabella woke to the sound of a 7-year-old practicing piano scales in the next room and the smell of real coffee note of practicing piano scales. $30 a pound stuff Harrison imported from Jamaica, but something that came from a can and tasted like comfort. She was on Miguel's couch, covered by a handmade quilt that Sophie had proudly informed her was from Grandma Martinez before she went to heaven. The hotel uniform from last night was folded neatly on the coffee table, replaced by an oversized Mets t-shirt and sweatpants that Miguel had left for her with a note. These were Elena's. I think she'd want them to be useful. Elena, Sophie's mother. The woman whose absence filled this apartment like background music, not sad, exactly, but present in every careful routine, every gentle tradition, every way Miguel and Sophie had learned to be a family of two. Isabella sat up, disoriented by how rested she felt. When was the last time she'd slept for 8 hours straight without checking her phone, without planning tomorrow's schedule, without Harrison's productivity podcasts murmuring in the background? Good morning, Sleeping Beauty. Sophie appeared in the doorway, already dressed for what Isabella realized was Sunday. Church clothes, a simple blue dress and white tights, her hair in careful braids. Morning, Isabella said, her voice hoarse with sleep. You look lovely. We're going to Mass at 10:30. Daddy says you can come if you want, but you don't have to if you're not Catholic, or if you don't believe in God, or if you just want to stay here and watch cartoons. Miguel emerged from the Kit Hartwell, carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking slightly embarrassed. Sophie, what did we talk about? Not to overwhelm guests with all the options at once, Sophie recited dutifully. But I wanted Isabella to know she has choices. Miguel handed Isabella a cup of coffee in a mug that read, World's Greatest Dad, in fading letters. You do have choices. No pressure either way. Isabella wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, inhaling the steam. I'd like to come, if that's okay. I haven't been to church in years. It was true. Her family attended midnight mass on Christmas Eve at St. Patrick's Cathedral, more social obligation than spiritual practice. The last time Isabella had actually prayed for something instead of just being seen praying was probably childhood. It's not St. Patrick's, Miguel warned gently, reading her expression. It's a small parish church, Spanish Mass. Father Miguel different. Miguel gives his homilies in 2 languages, but most of the congregation is families like us. Families like us. The phrase made something twist in Isabella's chest. When was the last time she'd belonged to an us that wasn't defined by net worth or social status? An hour later, Isabella found herself sitting in a wooden pew at Sacred Heart Catholic Church, squeezed between Miguel and Sophie, listening to hymns sung in Spanish and English by voices that belonged to people who actually meant the words they were singing. The church was small, maybe 100 people, with walls decorated by children's artwork depicting Bible stories in crayon and construction paper. The altar was simple but cared for, and Father Miguel, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and calloused hands like Miguel, spoke about love as a verb, not a feeling. Love is not what we say on Sundays, he said, switching between Spanish and English mid-sentence with the fluid grace of someone truly bilingual. Love is what we do on Mondays. When it's hard, when it costs us something, when nobody is watching. Isabella felt the words settle into her chest like seeds. Next to her, Sophie was following along in a children's Bible, her finger tracing the words she could read, whispering questions to her father about the ones she couldn't. This was what a real family looked like. Not performance, not management, not optimization, just presence. Just showing up for each other, day after day, in ways both large and small. After Mass, there was coffee and pastries in the parish hall, and Isabella found herself introduced to what felt like half of Queens. Mrs. Rodriguez, who ran a beauty salon and immediately offered Isabella a job. "You have good hands, Mija, I can tell." Mr. Hartwell, who owned a restaurant and insisted she try his weekend special dumplings. Maria Santos, a teacher who asked thoughtful questions about art history and listened to the answers like they mattered. Normal people, working people. People who knew Miguel as someone who fixed their plumbing for free when money was tight and always showed up when the parish needed volunteer labor. "Your boyfriend is a good man," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered to Isabella while Miguel was helping Father Miguel move folding chairs. "Oh, we're not," Isabella started, then stopped. What were they? Two strangers who'd found each other in the wreckage of her old life? A man who'd shown her kindness and a woman who was learning what kindness felt like? "He's a good man," she agreed instead. "And you're good for him. I can see it in how he looks at you." Isabella glanced across the room, where Miguel was listening to Sophie explain something very seriously, while she gestured wildly with a half-eaten donut. When he caught Isabella looking, he smiled, not the practiced smile of someone working an angle, but the unconscious expression of someone genuinely happy. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that? They walked home through Queens in the afternoon sunlight, Sophie skipping ahead on the sidewalk, while Miguel and Isabella followed at a more leisurely pace. The neighborhoods they passed were alive with Sunday afternoon life, families grilling on fire escapes, kids playing stickball in the street, elderly men playing dominoes at folding tables. "It's beautiful," Isabella said, surprising herself. "What is?" "This. All of it. The way people live here. The way they know each other." Miguel looked around as if seeing his neighborhood through her eyes. "It's not glamorous. Glamorous is overrated." She paused. "I lived in a penthouse for 2 years, and I didn't know my neighbors' names. Sophie knows half the borough. Sophie's social. She gets that from her mother." There it was again, Elena, present in the conversation like a third person walking with them. Isabella realized she wasn't jealous of the dead woman. If anything, she was grateful. Elena had loved these two people well enough to leave them capable of loving again. Back at the apartment, Sophie settled at the Kit Hartwell table with homework while Miguel started preparing what he called Sunday sauce, a tomato sauce that would simmer for hours and fill the apartment with the smell of garlic and basil and something that couldn't be bought in any store. Isabella found herself chopping onions, tears streaming down her face from the sharp bite of sulfur, and feeling more useful than she had in months. "You don't have to," Miguel started. "I want to." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I like helping." "When's the last time someone let you help?" The question caught her off guard. Harrison had staff for everything. Her parents had staff for everything. Her entire social circle was built around people who paid other people to handle the practical details of life. "I can't remember," she said quietly. They cooked together in companionable silence, moving around each other in the small Kit Hartwell with an ease that felt both new and familiar. Miguel was patient when she asked questions, encouraging when she worried she was doing something wrong. "Cooking isn't about perfection," he said, watching her stir the sauce. "It's about love. You can taste the difference." Around 4 o'clock, Isabella's phone rang. She'd forgotten she even had it until Miguel found it in the pocket of last night's jacket, where it had been buzzing intermittently all day. 23 missed calls, 47 text messages, 17 voicemails. Her mother's name filled the screen. Isabella stared at the phone like it was a live snake. "You don't have to answer," Miguel said gently. "I know," but she also knew her mother. Patricia Romano Hartwell was many things: controlling, demanding, occasionally ruthless. But she was also genuinely worried when she couldn't reach her daughter. "But I should." She stepped onto the balcony and answered on the 4th ring. "Isabella Marie Romano Hartwell, where the hell are you?" Her mother's voice was tight with the particular brand of panic that came from losing control of a situation. In the background, Isabella could hear the murmur of voices, probably her father and Harrison doing damage control. "I'm safe, Mom." "Safe? Safe? You disappeared from your own wedding, Isabella. The New York Post has your picture on the front page. TMZ is calling you the runaway heiress. Harrison is threatening to sue for breach of contract. Apparently your father signed some sort of agreement about the prenup that includes public embarrassment clauses." Isabella closed her eyes. Of course there were contracts. Of course Harrison had found a way to monetize even heartbreak. "I'm sorry about the embarrassment." "I don't care about the embarrassment." Her mother's voice cracked slightly. "I care about you. Where are you? Who are you with? Are you hurt?" And there it was. Underneath all the social anxiety and reputation management, her mother was scared. Scared that her daughter had finally cracked under the pressure of being Patricia Romano Hartwell's perfect child. "I'm in Queens," Isabella said quietly. "With friends." "What friends?" "You don't have any friends in Queens." "I do now." A long pause. Isabella could practically hear her mother's mind working, trying to figure out how to handle this unprecedented situation. "Come home," Patricia said finally. "Whatever this is, this crisis, this breakdown, this rebellion, we can fix it. Harrison is willing to postpone the wedding. We can get you counseling." "We can, Mom." Isabella's voice was gentle but firm. "This isn't a breakdown. This is me figuring out who I actually am. You're Isabella Romano Hartwell. You're our daughter. I'm a person who makes excellent pancakes and terrible financial decisions and who just spent the morning in a church where people actually mean what they pray about." Isabella took a breath. "I'm still figuring out the rest." Another long pause. "Is there a man?" her mother asked, her voice carefully neutral. Isabella looked through the sliding door at Miguel, who was helping Sophie with math homework at the Kit Hartwell table. Both of them bent over a workbook with identical expressions of concentration. "Maybe," she said honestly. "Isabella, I have to go, Mom. I love you. Tell Dad I love him too. But I'm not coming home. Not yet." She hung up before her mother could respond and turned off the phone. When she went back inside, Miguel and Sophie were putting the finishing touches on what appeared to be a math project involving poster board and colored markers. "Everything okay?" Miguel asked, not looking up from the project but clearly listening. "Getting there," Isabella said. Sophie looked up at her with serious 7-year-old eyes. "Sometimes moms worry too much because they love you so much it makes them scared." Isabella knelt down beside Sophie's chair. "That's very wise. My daddy told me that after Mommy died. He said people worry because love makes us want to protect each other, even when we can't." Isabella glanced at Miguel, who was carefully not meeting her eyes, his focus entirely on helping his daughter color in a graph about favorite ice cream flavors. Love as protection, love as presence, love as showing up, day after day, especially when it was hard. Isabella was beginning to understand what she'd been missing, and what she might be ready to find. Monday morning arrived like a reckoning. Isabella woke before dawn, her body clock still programmed for Harrison's optimization schedule, and found Miguel already in the Kit Hartwell making coffee. He was dressed for work jeans, work boots, a flannel shirt that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. "You're up early," he said softly, handing her a mug. Old habits. She accepted the coffee gratefully. "What time do you start work?" 7. Job site in Brooklyn. We're renovating a community center." Something in his voice made her look at him more carefully. There were shadows under his eyes, and his movements had the careful precision of someone who hadn't slept well. "You okay?" Miguel was quiet for a moment, staring into his coffee cup. "I've been thinking about what happens next." The words hung in the morning air between them. Isabella felt her stomach tighten. Of course. She'd been living in a bubble for 2 days, playing house with a man and his daughter, pretending that running away from her problems had actually solved them. "You want me to leave?" she said quietly. "No." The word came out faster than he'd intended. "That's not no. But Isabella, you have a life, a real life. Family, money, responsibilities. And I have Sophie to think about. Isabella set down her mug, understanding flooding through her. You're protecting her. She's already asking when you're coming back from work today. She's making plans for next weekend. Miguel rubbed his face with his hands. She's 7 years old, and she lost her mother 4 years ago. I can't let her get attached to someone who might disappear. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, mostly because they were completely fair. What was she doing here? Playing dress-up in someone else's life? Using Miguel and Sophie as props in her quarter-life crisis? You're right, she said finally. I should go. Isabella. No, you're absolutely right. I don't belong here. I don't know what I was thinking. She stood up, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but in this Kit Hartwell where she'd felt more at home than in her own apartment. I'll get my things. She started toward the living room, but Miguel caught her arm gently. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. What do you want, Isabella? Really want? Not what you're running away from, but what you're running toward. The question stopped her cold. What did she want? She wanted to wake up in a place where people made coffee because they liked the ritual, not because it was optimized for productivity. She wanted to help with homework and Sunday sauce and small problems that could be solved with attention instead of money. She wanted to matter to people who mattered to her. She wanted Miguel to look at her the way he had yesterday at church, like she was someone worth keeping. I want to stay, she whispered. But I don't know how. Miguel's grip on her arm gentled, his thumb brushing across her wrist. What would staying look like? Practically, I mean. Isabella almost laughed. Practical. 2 days ago, her biggest practical concern had been whether to serve champagne or Prosecco at the reception. Now she was trying to figure out how to rebuild her entire existence. I don't know, she admitted. I have money, but it's all tied up in trusts and accounts that my parents control. I could get a job, but I don't know how to do anything useful. I could find an apartment, but I don't want to find an apartment. I want to stay here, with you and Sophie. I want to learn how to be the kind of person who belongs in a place like this. The words were out before she could stop them, raw and honest and terrifying. Miguel stared at her for a long moment. Isabella, you can't just decide to be a different person because you don't like the one you were. Why not? Because running away isn't the same as moving towards something. Because Sophie isn't a prop in your journey of self-discovery. Because, he stopped, his jaw working. Because I can't be the rebound from your entire life. The words stung because they were true, but they were also incomplete. What if it's not a rebound? She asked quietly. What if it's the first real thing I've ever felt? Before Miguel could answer, Sophie appeared in the Kit Hartwell doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes and wearing pajamas covered in cartoon cats. Why is everyone whispering? She asked. Are you fighting? No, mija, Miguel said quickly, releasing Isabella's arm. Just talking about grown-up stuff. Sophie looked between them with the uncanny intuition of children who've learned to read adult emotions for survival. Isabella, are you sad again? Isabella knelt down to Sophie's level, her heart breaking at the worry in the little girl's eyes. A little bit, sweetheart, but not because of you. Never because of you. Is it because of the prince who wasn't really a prince? Isabella blinked. What? The man you were supposed to marry. In the stories, sometimes the princess thinks she's found her prince, but he's actually just a regular person wearing fancy clothes. And then she has to find her real prince. Miguel made a sound that might have been a laugh. Where do you get this stuff? From books, Daddy. Books teach you everything. Sophie looked at Isabella seriously. Did you find your real prince yet? Isabella glanced at Miguel, who was very carefully not meeting her eyes. I think I might have. Good, Sophie said matter-of-factly. Princes should make you pancakes and help with homework and not make you cry at fancy parties. She padded toward the bathroom, apparently satisfied that the adults had sorted out their fairy tale complications. Isabella and Miguel stood in the sudden quiet, the weight of Sophie's innocent wisdom settling around them. She's going to break hearts someday, Isabella said finally. She already broke mine, Miguel replied. The day she was born. Something in his voice made Isabella look at him more carefully. There was love there, fierce and protective and absolute. But there was also fear. The fear of someone who had already lost everything once and couldn't survive losing it again. I'm not going anywhere, she said quietly. You don't know that. I do know that, Miguel. Look at me. He met her eyes reluctantly. I know you have every reason not to trust this. Me. I know I'm asking you to take a leap of faith with someone who just blew up her entire life on national television. But I'm not the same person who walked down that aisle 2 days ago. People don't change overnight, Isabella. No, they don't. But sometimes it takes something dramatic to show you who you actually were all along. She took a step closer. I've been pretending to be someone else for so long that I forgot there was a real person underneath all the performance. But she's still here. And she wants to learn how to build something real with people who matter. Miguel was quiet for a long moment, his coffee growing cold in his hands. What about your family? Harrison? Your old life? What about them? They're not just going to disappear because you want them to. Isabella nodded. He was right, of course. Her parents weren't going to stop being her parents. Harrison wasn't going to stop being humiliated and angry. The society pages weren't going to stop treating her personal life like entertainment, but for the first time in her adult life, she didn't care. Let them come, she said. Let them try to drag me back to something that was slowly killing me. I know the difference now between existing and living. Miguel studied her face like he was memorizing it. What? She asked. I'm trying to figure out if you're brave or crazy. Can't I be both? This time he did smile, just a little. Yeah, I think you probably can. Sophie reappeared in the Kit Hartwell, now dressed for school and carrying a backpack covered in patches. Daddy, we're going to be late. And Isabella, Mrs. Rodriguez called. She wants to know if you can start work today. Isabella looked at Miguel. Mrs. Rodriguez called? I may have mentioned that you were looking for work, he said, looking slightly embarrassed. She's been trying to find someone to help at the salon. The pay isn't much, but it's real work. Work that matters. It's washing hair and sweeping floors. It's honest work with honest people. Isabella felt something settle in her chest, solid and sure. I'd like that. Miguel was quiet for another moment. Then, what if this doesn't work? What if 6 months from now you realize you miss your old life? What if 6 months from now I realize I've never been happier? What if Sophie gets her heart broken? What if she doesn't? What if she gets to see what it looks like when two people choose each other every day, even when it's hard? Miguel's smile was small but real. You're not going to make this easy, are you? I don't want easy, Isabella said. I want real. Sophie, who had been listening to this exchange with the patience of someone accustomed to adults working through their complications, finally spoke up. Are you done talking about feelings now? Because I really don't want to be late for school. Miguel laughed, the sound lighter than Isabella had heard from him yet. Yeah, mija, we're done talking about feelings. Good. Isabella, you can walk me to school if you want. It's on the way to Mrs. Rodriguez's salon. Isabella looked at Miguel, who nodded. If you're sure. I'm sure. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Isabella Romano Hartwell was absolutely, completely sure about something, even if she had no idea what came next. 3 weeks later, Isabella's hands smelled permanently of shampoo and her feet ached from standing on tile floors, and she had never been happier. Bella's Beauty Mrs. Rodriguez had insisted on the name change, claiming Isabella was too fancy for a neighborhood salon had become her second home. She swept hair, washed out color treatments, and listened to the stories of women who treated their weekly appointments like therapy sessions. Mrs. Hartwell talked about her son's college applications while Isabella massaged conditioner into her graying roots. Maria Santos shared her classroom frustrations during her monthly trim. Even the teenagers came to trust Isabella with their boy problems and college anxieties. finding something comforting about confessing their secrets to someone who listened without judgment. Isabella was learning that real work wasn't about optimizing outcomes or maximizing efficiency. It was about showing up for people, one person at a time, in whatever small way they needed. She was also learning that her old life hadn't disappeared just because she'd walked away from it. Harrison had been calling twice a day for the first week, leaving increasingly frustrated voicemails about working through this like adults and minimizing the damage to both our reputations. When she didn't respond, he'd hired a private investigator to find her, which had led to a very uncomfortable conversation with Miguel about whether Isabella's problems were going to become Sophie's problems. Her parents had been more subtle but more persistent. Her mother showed up at the salon on a Thursday afternoon, looking like she'd stepped out of a Bergdorf's catalog and clearly horrified by the linoleum floors and fluorescent lighting. "Isabella." Patricia Romano, Hartwell's voice could have cut glass. "We need to talk." Isabella had been in the middle of shampooing Mrs. Valdez's hair, her hands buried in suds and warm water. "I'm working, Mom." "This isn't work, Isabella. This is whatever this is." Her mother gestured vaguely at the salon, encompassing everything from the mismatched styling chairs to the Spanish radio station playing in the background. "This is you having some sort of breakdown." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared from the back room like a protective mother bear. "Excuse me, Senora, but my employee is busy with a client. If you want to make an appointment?" "I'm her mother," Patricia said, as if that explained everything. "Then you should be proud," Miss Rodriguez replied calmly. "Your daughter is a good worker. Very gentle hands, very kind heart." Isabella caught Mrs. Rodriguez's eye in the mirror and smiled gratefully. In 3 weeks, this woman had shown Isabella more practical support than her parents had provided in years. "Isabella," her mother tried again, "this has gone on long enough. Harrison is willing to forgive this episode. We can have a small ceremony, very private, just family." "No." The word came out quietly but firmly. Isabella rinsed Mrs. Valdez's hair with steady hands, her movements calm despite the tension crackling through the salon. "No?" Patricia's voice rose an octave. "No, Mom. I'm not marrying Harrison. I'm not coming home. I'm not apologizing for choosing a life that makes me happy instead of one that makes you comfortable." "Happy?" Patricia laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. "You're washing hair for minimum wage, Isabella. You're living in Queens with a man we've never met, and his child. How is any of this happiness?" Isabella helped Mrs. Valdez sit up, wrapping her hair in a towel with the careful attention she'd learned from watching Mrs. Rodriguez work. "I wake up every morning excited about my day," Isabella said simply. "When's the last time you could say that?" Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it. The question had clearly caught her off guard. "I have to get back to work," Isabella continued. "Mrs. Valdez has a date tonight, and we need to make sure she looks beautiful." Mrs. Valdez, who had been following this exchange with the fascination of someone watching a telenovela, patted Isabella's hand. "Mija, your daughter is good people. You should be proud." "Patricia Romano." Hartwell stared at the elderly woman for a moment, then at Isabella, then at the salon full of women who were clearly prepared to defend their newest member. "This isn't over," she said finally. "I know," Isabella replied. "But it's not up to you anymore." Her mother left without another word, the bell over the door, chiming her departure like a punctuation mark. The salon was quiet for a moment. Then Mrs. Rodriguez turned up the radio, and everyone went back to their conversations as if nothing had happened. But Isabella knew something had shifted. She'd stood her ground with her mother, really stood her ground, not just run away, and she was still here, still whole, still sure about her choices. That evening, she told Miguel about the confrontation while they cooked dinner together. Sophie was at the Kit Hartwell table doing homework, occasionally asking for help with spelling words that seemed designed to torture second graders. "How do you spell because?" Sophie called out. "Because." Miguel and Isabella said in unison, then looked at each other and laughed. "We're becoming predictable," Miguel said. "Is that bad?" "No, it's nice. Predictable can be nice." Isabella was learning that predictable was underrated when it came from choice rather than obligation. She liked knowing that Miguel would have coffee ready when she woke up. She liked that Sophie would ask her to braid her hair for school. She liked that Sunday mornings meant church and afternoon sauce-making and evening movies on the couch. She liked belonging somewhere. "My mother thinks I'm having a breakdown," she said, chopping vegetables for the salad. "Are you?" Isabella considered the question seriously. "Maybe, but if I am, it's a good breakdown. The kind where you break down the walls you built to keep yourself small." Miguel smiled. "I like that kind of breakdown." They were interrupted by a knock at the doorknob, the tentative knock of neighbors, or the confident knock of delivery drivers. But something more urgent. Miguel glanced at Isabella, who shrugged. They weren't expecting anyone. When Miguel opened the door, Harrison Blackwood III was standing in the hallway, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread about casual weekend wear for the discerning gentleman. His jeans probably cost more than Miguel made in a week, and his relaxed button-down was pressed to perfection. "Isabella," Harrison said, looking past Miguel as if he didn't exist, "we need to talk." Sophie looked up from her homework with interest. "Daddy, who's the fancy man?" Miguel's jaw tightened. "Sophie, go to your room and finish your homework there." "But, now Mia." Sophie gathered her books, shooting curious glances at Harrison as she passed. When her bedroom door closed, the apartment suddenly felt much smaller. "You must be Miguel," Harrison said, extending a hand like he was networking at a corporate event. "Harrison Blackwood. Isabella's fiancé." "Ex-fiancé," Isabella corrected, stepping beside Miguel. "What are you doing here, Harrison?" "I came to bring you home." Harrison's smile was the one he used in board meetings when he was about to make an offer that couldn't be refused. "I've been patient, Isabella. I've given you space to work through whatever this is. But enough is enough. This isn't something I'm working through," Isabella said quietly. "This is my life." Harrison looked around the small apartment like he was surveying damage from a natural disaster. "This isn't your life. This is you playing house with people who don't understand what you're giving up." Miguel stepped forward slightly, a movement so subtle Isabella might have missed it if she hadn't been learning to read his body language. "I think you should leave." "I don't think we've been properly introduced," Harrison said, his voice carrying the particular condescension of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. "I'm Harrison Blackwood. Perhaps you've heard of Blackwood Technologies? We're disrupting the wellness space through AI-optimized—" "I know who you are," Miguel said calmly. "You're the man who made Isabella feel like she needed to run away from her own wedding." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Harrison's smile faltered for just a moment before reassembling itself. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Isabella is going through a difficult time. She's not thinking clearly. I'm here to help her. By showing up uninvited at someone else's home and demanding she come back to a life that made her miserable." "Miserable?" Harrison laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. "I gave her everything. Penthouse apartment, unlimited shopping budget, access to the best restaurants, the finest cultural events. You gave her your version of everything," Miguel said, echoing Isabella's words from the wedding. "Did you ever ask what she actually wanted?" Harrison looked genuinely confused by the question. She had everything she could want. Except a choice in any of it. Isabella watched this exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. She was seeing Harrison clearly for maybe the first Timino as the successful, attractive man her parents had chosen for her, but as someone who genuinely believed that wealth and status were the same thing as love, and she was seeing Miguel defend her in a way no one ever had. Not with money or connections or power, but with simple, unwavering certainty that she deserved better. "Harrison," she said quietly, stepping forward. "You should go. Isabella, be reasonable. Look at this place." He gestured around the apartment. "Look at your life right now. You're working in a beauty salon. You're living in Queens. You're dating a—" He looked at Miguel dismissively. A construction worker. His name is Miguel, Isabella said, her voice getting stronger. He's a carpenter and a father, and one of the best men I've ever known. And yes, I'm working in a beauty salon where people treat me like I matter for who I am, not what I have. Yes, I'm living in Queens, where I wake up happy every morning instead of dreading the day ahead. This isn't you, Isabella. No, Harrison. That penthouse princess who scheduled spontaneity and optimized her emotions, that wasn't me. This is me. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his practiced composure finally starting to crack. I loved you. The words hung in the air, and Isabella felt something twist in her chest. Not regret exactly, but sadness for what they'd both lost or maybe never had. You loved the idea of me, she said gently. You loved having the perfect girlfriend who looked good at events and never challenged your plans. But you never loved Isabella. You never even met her. Harrison looked like he was going to argue, then stopped. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. What am I supposed to do now? He asked. And for a moment, he sounded almost vulnerable. Find someone who actually wants to be optimized, Isabella said. Find someone who thinks your meditation app notifications are charming instead of insulting. Find someone who chooses you, Harrison, not your lifestyle or your status or your family connections. You. Harrison stared at her for another long moment. Then he looked at Miguel, then back at Isabella. You're really not coming back. I'm really not coming back. He nodded slowly, like he was processing information he'd never expected to receive. Okay. He turned toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I hope you're happy. I am, Isabella said. I really am. After Harrison left, the apartment felt different. Lighter, somehow, like a storm had passed and left cleaner air behind. Sophie emerged from her room cautiously. Is the fancy man gone? He's gone, Mija, Miguel said. Good, he seemed mean. She looked at Isabella seriously. Are you okay? Isabella knelt down and pulled Sophie into a hug, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and unconditional acceptance. I'm perfect, she said, and for the first time in her adult life, she meant it. Later that night, after Sophie was asleep and the dishes were done, Isabella and Miguel sat on the balcony under a sky full of stars. They couldn't see through the city light pollution, but knew were there anyway. Thank you, Isabella said quietly. For what? For defending me, for standing up to Harrison, she struggled to find words for everything he'd given her, for showing me what it feels like to be chosen. Miguel was quiet for a moment, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Isabella? Yeah? I love you. The words were simple, honest, and completely without agenda. Not a negotiation or a transaction or a strategic alliance. Just truth, offered freely, with no expectation of return. Isabella turned to look at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known she was praying. I love you too, she said. I love the way you make pancakes on Sunday mornings and help Sophie with homework and fix things with your hands. I love that you really see me and still choose to be here. Even if here is a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens instead of a penthouse in Manhattan, especially because it's a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Miguel smiled, the expression soft and real in the dim light from the living room window. So what happens now? He asked. Isabella looked out at the sleeping city, at the lights in windows where other families were living their own quiet, complicated, beautiful lives. Now we see what we can build together, she said. One day at a time. And in the morning, they would wake up and make coffee and help Sophie get ready for school and go to work and come home and cook dinner and be present for each other in all the small, essential ways that love actually lived. It wouldn't be glamorous or optimized or worthy of magazine covers. It would be real. And real, Isabella had learned, was more than enough.